Okay, I'll just begin with a very, very short idea tonight, Rosh Chodesh Kislev. So just a very brief idea on the month of Kislev, which I think is a little bit relevant to our current situation. Essentially, Kislev as a month is the month which missed out for many, many, many centuries and then had to be repaid much later on. Right? That's the whole essence of Kislev. Because I'll say, it's a medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni, that the construction of the Mishkan began on the 15th of Tishrei, which is obviously the first day of Sukkot, and it actually ended in the month of Kislev. So really, they should have gone ahead straight away with the inauguration of the Mishkan, but that didn't take place, as we know, until Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It was delayed because Hashem wanted it to take place in the month in which Yitzchak was born. It's all linked to Yitzchak. Yitzchak corresponds to Avodah, the whole idea of the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash and Tefillah, and that's why it was delayed to the month of Nisan. But that means Kislev as a whole lost out, and of course we know that Kislev is eventually repaid. Hashem says, the way the Medrash phrases it is like this: it's for me to pay back. How did Hashem pay back Kislev? Chanukas Beis Chashmonai, with the Chanukas Beis Chashmonai, the dedication of the time of Chanukah. So it comes out that really the month of Kislev is a month of opportunities delayed. It's a month which only realizes its potential much later on. You know, and perhaps just occurred to me that maybe we can take some chizuk from that, in the sense that we're in a situation which feels in many ways b'diavad, after the fact. Kislev is a month that felt like that for many, many centuries, but eventually it found its rightful place in the calendar with the dedication of the Chashmonaim. So things do sometimes take a bit of time, but they eventually come. As they say, all good things come to those who wait. That is the essence of the month of Kislev. It's also worth noting that we're going to come to hopefully either today or next time, we'll come to one of the most important stories in the whole of Shas about the Chashmonaim, the story of Herod and the Hasmonean dynasty. So it's quite relevant and important for the Chanukah as well. So that's also a nice connection. Okay, right. We got up to Iboilahu. So that is where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8 lines down. Eight lines down. We just concluded last time with the whole question about the bias sheni. Why was there no Amor trucks, and why was there no physical wall barrier between the between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the bias sheni? We said the reason is because it was too high. Once you got to a certain height, they'd have to make it part wall and part paroches, and that wouldn't work well. So therefore, that's why it was entirely a paroches. And we got onto that, and that itself we got onto in turn because we were discussing the height of walls and the thickness of walls. A certain height, you need a certain thickness of material to support the wall, right? And the idea being, we said last week, is that's why we had to have this discussion about the Beis Hamikdash, because otherwise the whole thing will fall apart. If you can see that you can have a wall that's much higher, so the precise measurements of walls effectively that are given in the Mishnah, it wouldn't fit, it wouldn't all hang together. So that's why we substantiate the reason why it is that in fact in the Beis Hamikdash it was a different it was a different story, in the sense that it was too high, and that's why in the second Beis Hamikdash there was a paroches there rather than a physical wall. The Gemara now goes back to this question about the thickness of the materials used. They ask the following question: Hein b'sidon, edom hein below sidon. When we talk about the thickness of the walls, the measurements that are mentioned in the Mishnah, do we mean with the thickness of the cement or the lime or whatever it is that's needed to hold the wall in place, or below sidon, maybe it means them without the lime, or as the bricks themselves without the cement or the lime, which is needed, which is obviously needed as well. That's the question. What does the measurement include that or not? Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman says, Mistabra, it's logical to say that it means hein v'sidon. It means they and their lime as well. In other words, they and also the thickness of the wall, but it also includes the cement material as well. And that means to say, when we say in the Mishnah the measurements of 6, whatever it was, 6 tefachim or 5 or 4, whatever, it includes everything that you need in the wall. And the Gemara says, the isal kadaita chain below sidon. If you're going to say it's there without the cement, without the lime, l'sanye l'shure, right? Then it should just say, it should say what the full measurement is. It should say what the full measurement is. In other words, you're missing out something, right? If you don't actually have if you're leaving out the thickness of whatever the cement is, it's at the end of the day adds on to the thickness, and it should mention it. So the fact that it doesn't must mean that it's incorporated in the thickness of a tefach that's mentioned. And it must be, says the Gemara, hein v'sidon. It must be they and the sid together. They and the lime together must be all inclusive. So that's what the Gemara is suggesting. The Gemara is saying it must be that it includes both. So the Gemara, that's right, hein v'sidon, right? It says, well, no. In reality, I can say to you, hein below sidon. It means they and without the cement. It means just the thickness of the bricks themselves. It doesn't include the cement or whatever you're using, the lime, whatever you're using. The kiven de lohovi tefach, and since it doesn't add up to an additional tefach, loitoni. It doesn't mention in the Mishnah because it adds less than a tefach. So the Gemara says, v'hokatoni, surely it says, the Bach changes this a bit, because there's no saying to v'chayim u'mechza, right? All the way we have in the Gemara is B'levenim with bricks, it says, the Mishnah does list half tefachim. It says this one has to give a tefach and a half, this one has to give a tefach and a half, or 2 tefachim and a half. You do mention halves. The Gemara says, no. Also over there, chozi litzturufi. There, it's enough to join it together. There, the tefachim can be joined together to make a whole tefach. And because you join it together to make a whole tefach, that is why it mentions halves. It mentions bits. But in a situation where you're not joining anything together, you're just it is going to be less than a tefach. Even when you add it all up, it's not listed because it's not significant enough to list. Toshma says the Gemara, it's proved from the classic Mishnah in Eruvin, Hakura she'omru rechova kadei lekabel oriach. The Korah they mention, when you have the Korah, the end of the Movui, the end of the alleyway, to make the heka, to show the distinction between where the end of the Movui is. So that Korah, that cross beam, it has to be wide enough in order to receive or to hold an oriach, a brick. What is an oriach? Well, oriach really means half a brick. A oriach, this half a brick, is chatzi leveina shel gimel tefachim. It's half a brick of 3 tefachim. So it's a brick and a half. In other words, it's a tefach and a half. It's a tefach and a half. So what you see from here, it must be that when it says in our Mishnah that each one has to give a tefach and a half to make up a full size of a leveina, which is 3 tefachim, that obviously means the brick alone, without the cement. Because you see from the Mishnah in Eruvin that a brick is 3 tefachim. That's just a brick, right? That's a brick without anything cementing it. So clearly, it means a brick without the cement. So Gemara says, no, Hosom b'rav Ravosah. There it's talking about a large size brick. With a large size brick, it is 3 tefachim. But our Mishnah could be talking about a small size that with the cement, it's only 3 tefachim. There could be 2 different, slightly different measurements of what a leveina is. It could be over a larger one and a smaller one. You can infer the same thing, because the Mishnah says shlosha tefachim. It says a brick which is, in other words, the Mishnah Eruvin says a leveina which is 3 tefachim wide. Miklal de ikozutra. It implies that there is a brick, there is a type of brick that is actually smaller than that. There is a brick which is smaller than that, and that's still considered to have the name of a brick. Shmamina, this is a good proof. In other words, you can't prove from here that it's specifically, you can't prove from that brisa anyway that it specifically in our Mishnah means without the cement. It could be our Mishnah is inclusive of the sid, of the cement, and here we are just simply. And here we are just talking about a slightly smaller size of brick than the one in Eruvin. So that's how the Gemara wraps that up, with saying that it is inconclusive that we are talking, what exactly we're talking here. Although it would seem that we follow it, that the conclusion is at the end of the day, at least I haven't looked up the halacha, but it seems to be from the Ein Mishpat that we really go with what was the Gemara's original logical argument, that once you're listing a measurement, right, it's logical that everything's included. 6 tefachim includes everything, right? Includes the brick and includes the cement and everything else. Let's just see Rashi on this. So Rashi is the last of the wide lines at the top. Hein bestidon, or hein below sidon. Hani shuri demas nisan. These measurements in our Mishnah, im ovi atiach kol chashiv lohen. Does it include it with the thickness of the cement? Does it include it with the thickness of the cement? Maybe it's the place of the stones in width. Said without excluding the actual lime or whatever it is, the cement part, right? Surely it says Rashi, it says 2.5 tefachim. Alma, so you see chati tefach nami choshev. You're also including half a tefach, right? It says 2.5 tefachim. That means you do talk about half tefachim. The Gemara says no. Chazi litztorofi. There it is shazem it's starting the tefach. There, if you join them together, you add up to a tefach, and that's why he talks about halves. And then we brought the proof in the Mishnah. When it comes to a hechshemovui, we talk about a korah. Gimel tefachim, gimel tefachim. You see 3 tefachim. It talks about our Mishnah Gabi Levenin, where it talks about bricks. Because the tani zenus and tefach umechza, zenus and tefach umechza. Each one gives a 1.5. Hein below sid and koma. It's there without the sid, without the cement, without the thing holding it together. Hein below sid and koma. The hagel levenin lochut v'ashlesh tefachim. You see that a brick alone is 3 tefachim. The Gemara says, Hosom v'rav ravosa. There we answer, no, there we say that it's a large brick. And our Mishnah talking where it's a small brick. Instead on so that with the lime, it is only 3 tefachim. You can have slightly different sizes of bricks, so you can't prove anything from there. Good, fine. Okay, now we come to a completely different sugya. Any questions on that little final sugya? Final little piece on that? No, we're okay? Okay. Nothing wrong with the bricks. Okay, good. So we're going on to a completely different sugya, fascinating Gemara, about the construction or the destruction of shuls. It's not entirely clear, and I was trying to work this out today, what the connection is in any great detail between this and the previous sugya. If anyone has any ideas beyond the obvious, if you like, which is that we're discussing construction, we're discussing building walls, then please do let me know. I mean, the Gemara, as we'll see, is going to sort of segue from a discussion about constructing shuls into the Beis Hamikdash. So that that links to the size, the discussion that we mentioned before about in the Gemara about the Amatraksin, and the second Beis Hamikdash, the division between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Right, that's the connection, if you like. Possibly because we spoke about how you build. How they built the Beis Hamikdash, the Bayis Sheni, which is very relevant specifically to the building of the Beis Hamikdash of Herod, which is what we're going to talk about later. So maybe that's the connection. Either way, says the Gemara. Omar Rav Chisda says the lister inish beiknishta. Person is not allowed to knock down a shul ad the bani beiknishta achriti until you build another shul in its place. So obviously we're not talking here about destroying for any negative reason. We're talking about because you need to rebuild a shul. You can't knock it down until you build another one in its place. And the question is why? And the Gemara gives 2 reasons. Ikad Amri, some say Mishum Peshiusa. The concern is that you might not do it. Something might happen, something might go wrong. They might be negligent. They might end up not building the shul that they intend to build. So if you've knocked down your shul and you haven't yet built, you haven't yet built the other one in the first place, so then you're going to end up losing out. You're going to end up, you might end up never building it. So you must make sure you build the new one first. That's what the Gemara says. The Ekadomi and others say Mishum Tzluye. The reason is simply because you need a temporary place to daven during the building works. So it's a practical reason. Okay, it's a practical reason. I'll tell you a little historic point about this Gemara. When I was a couple of years, 3-4 years ago, we had the zechus to build a new shul in Hadley Wood, my previous community, It took a long time to get the planning permission and everything else. And the first Shabbos, after when we started the building work, so we weren't no longer obviously in the shul. I mean, the shul was like many shuls, it was on the same place. It was just completely rebuilt, redone, whatever internally, and expanded and everything else. We were in a temporary location from that first Shabbos, and I learned after davening we went through this Gemara. I went through this Gemara to try and work out, a little bit tongue in cheek, whether we'd done the right thing to go into another temporary location. It was bizarre for a number of reasons, apart from the fact that our temporary location was in I think an 18th or even maybe 17th century, I can't remember, barn. Someone had on their estate a very large barn, and we converted that into a temporary shul. It was quite a very atmospheric. But either way, we went through this Gemara to try and work out whether it was the right thing to do or not. The Gemara gives these two reasons. Some say mishum pshusa, because you might end up doing it. Because you need a place to daven. My beinayu, what's the difference between these two reasons? So ikka beinayu, the difference is then there's two. Interesting. There's two versions of the next words in the Gemara. Ikka beinayu, the difference is the ikka. So some say the ikka beiknishta achriti. That's what it says in brackets, right? You got another shul. The difference is if there is another shul. What do you mean there's another shul? If there's another shul, right, then you've got a place. You got a place to daven in. Yeah, if you've got another shul, then presumably that means you've got a place to daven in, so you're okay. You don't have to worry about where you're going to daven temporarily. There's another shul in town. Now the Maharsha changes the girsa based on Tosfos to say ikka beinayu the ikka duchtol itzluye. You got a temporary place to daven. You got a temporary location. Not the same as saying you got another shul. You got somewhere else you can daven. You got a garden minyan. You don't have to worry about the fact that you won't have anywhere place to daven. You got a place. You got somewhere. You got a backyard. Doesn't matter. You got a place that you can daven in. Now, what does the Gemara mean? What does the Gemara mean in terms of this? In terms of this ikka beinayu? So, according to whichever version you learn, whichever the text you have, whether you say there's another shul or you say you've got a place to daven, it would seem that the Gemara is saying that if you go with the practical reason, if you say the whole reason of Rav Chisda not to knock down your shul until you get another one is simply for practical purposes. You cannot knock down a building, you cannot knock down a shul, you're going to have to daven. So you have to make sure you've got a temporary location, right? So if it's just for the temporary practical reason, then you can solve the problem very easily. Yeah, someone's going to lend you their garden, you've got another shul in town, everyone can fit in, it doesn't matter. Whatever the reason is, you solve the practical problem. But if you say the reason why you're not allowed to rebuild a shul, you're not allowed to knock down a shul, until you rebuild a new one, is because of pshiusa, you might end up knocking it down. It doesn't matter how many other shuls there are in town, right? And it doesn't matter how many other places you might have to daven in. It's not a practical reason. It's a reason you might say, sort of quote unquote, it's in ruchnius. You might end up in a situation where something might happen, say, we have to use the example, but it's the obvious one, a worldwide pandemic comes along and you end up not being able to build your shul and you're stuck, right? I mean, things happen, and that would be a critical problem. So you ask yourself, why? I've got someone else to daven. So this is, according to that reason of that reason of the Gemara, the reason is not practical. The reason is because to be without a shul is a massive problem, right? To be left, it's not just a place to daven in. What I'm trying to bring out here is, and why this sugya is so fascinating and so relevant, is the very, difference between these two perspectives in the Gemara. And by the way, as we'll hopefully see, the halacha is mishum pshiusa, the first one, right? The difference between them is not just, okay, it could be this reason, could be that reason. No, it's a fundamental difference in what it means to have a shul. If you say mishum pshiusa, right, then it doesn't matter how many other shuls there are. You need the shul for that killer, for those people. They need their place. They need their mokum tefillah. And they cannot be without it, even if they've got somewhere else temporary. It's not good enough. They need their place. They need that's their mokum tefillah. You cannot dare to knock down the original building until you've built the new one. If you say it's just because you need a place to daven in, there are lots of solutions. It's a really fascinating sugya. Are you with me on this? Yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So, according to Rav Chisda, if you were in a small town and you had one shul in one place, and you didn't have another location to build the shul, would he say you can't knock your shul down?
According to the reason, according to the reason of Mishum Pshiusa, because of the concern is about you might end up not doing it, right? So then you will have a problem unless you can find a valid solution, right? There are other ways of there are other ways, I think, of getting around it, as hopefully we'll see as we go through the Gemara, as we have time to look at the halacha. But you're right. Ostensibly, at this point in the sugya, yeah, if you're in a little place, a little town, yeah, and you've got, it would seem you can't knock down your shul, right, to rebuild it until you've built the place, until you build a new one. Now, obviously, the biggest problem with that is if you're building it on the same place.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly, right. So let's put that on hold for the moment, right? Let's put that on hold. Your points are absolutely valid. Yeah, that's a problem. If you say Mishum Pshiusa, yeah, it's a problem. Okay, so wait, by the way, yeah, Jeremy.
There's always a shul that you don't go to.
Absolutely, indeed, even on the desert island. Yeah. It goes without saying, as I mentioned before, Zoom makes slightly more stilted with questions. Please do interrupt me, stop me, just otherwise I'll do all the talking, which is not good. So please do, yeah. So there you are, right? So this is the Gemara. Now the Gemara says like this: Meremo Mazutra, Sostri Ubonu, Beikaito Basisva. So they had the following solution. This is what they used to do. They used to knock down and build the summer shul, the sisva in the winter, and they used to build the bachad's in a little bit here. And they used to knock down and rebuild the winter shul in the summer. Until very recently, by the way, this was the practice. Yeah, does any of you done any of these tours to Europe? Yeah, there were plenty of cases in Amsterdam. Have you been to Amsterdam? The big shul there in Amsterdam, the Spanish and Portuguese shul in Amsterdam, right? You go and visit the shul. Anyone been to that shul? You've been to that shul? You've been there? So you see, there's you've got the massive shul, incredible, yeah. And then they take the little side room, which is the winter shul. They couldn't daven in there in the winter. There's no heating. To this day, there's no heating, right? They can't daven in there in the winter. So you have a winter shul and a summer shul. It's very common. Okay, there it was often in the same. There in that case, Amsterdam is in the same building, but they would often have different shuls for different times of the year. So they had a very simple solution when they had to do refurbishment. They had to rebuild the shul. So all they did was they used to do it during the other season, right? Then no one loses out. Everyone's fine. Yeah. Let's see Rashi on this, because then you've got no problem of shusha, because you've got your other shul. You've got another shul effectively.
Do we also learn from here that the bricks themselves have no intrinsic holiness? There's no issue in knocking down a shul.
No, that's interesting. That is very, very interesting. I was trying to remember if I saw something about this in halacha. No, there may be a problem. There may be a problem with that. Even if there is, though, the problem is only going to be if you take them down a level in Kedusha. So meaning if you're using your bricks and mortar for, as part of your rebuilding project, then you haven't got a problem anyway. Yeah, they haven't got a problem anyway. But look, I mean, we know that doesn't happen, right? When people rebuild a shul, they don't reuse. So obviously that, there is obviously, I mean, just like you say, ma'asim b'chol yom, right? You obviously we don't reuse the bricks. If we rebuild the shul, right, we don't reuse the bricks, right? I'm not sure whether there's a reason for that. It'd be nice to maybe we'll see Toras talks about the status of the botik neisios. That's right. The end of Toras will deal with this point. Let's see, we'll get them in sunshine. We'll do that Toras. Anyway, so let's just see Rashi on this. Mishum Pshiusa. Rashi says, right, Rashi is halfway down the Rashi. Maybe some accident will happen. I'm sure they'll be negligible. Something will happen. Something will go wrong. They won't be able to use their. They won't end up doing the rebuilding, and everything's going to go pear-shaped. That's the problem. Mishum Pshiusa. Or you say Mishum Tsuye, Kozman Abinyan. They need a place to daven whilst they're building. This says Rashi, if they had a shul for the winter, nomuch, with a low shul, biksolim, rechovim, with wide walls, v'chalonis mu'atin, only a few windows, because of the cold. That's what you do with you want to build a shul You want to build a room that is warmer. Obviously, you have a lower ceiling. You have wide walls, you have few windows. In the summer, in the summer, they had another shul where there was lots of air. They used to say this but obviously, I had the privilege to learn in Ponovitch, and when I was learning that they didn't, we had air conditioning, but they used to say that originally, before the aircon was installed in the Beis Medrash, so in the summer, they used to take out the windows for the whole of the summer. Anyone who's seen summer in Bnei Brak, Tel Aviv, right? It's insane. They used to remove the windows. It's on a hill, so there's always a breeze. There is always a breeze there. They should just take the windows out. So there you go. That's your summer shul. You need big windows. Right. So anyway, that's what Merim Mazutra used to do. They used to take out. There is a problem with this, of course, right? This thing about Merim Mazutra, right? Anyone can see what the problem is? What are they doing? If we're saying the problem is Mishum Pshiyusa, then you've always got to rebuild a new shul, right? So how does it help? Yeah? If you say that it's about having a place to daven in, right? So that's fine, yeah? Place to daven in. They got a place to daven in. I can daven in the summer shul whilst I'm rebuilding the winter shul in the summer, right? So it's fine. But if you say it's Mishum Pshiyusa, then it's a problem because there's still a concern. You haven't built the new shul. How can you knock anything down before rebuilding the new one?
But there was always a shul to daven in.
Yeah, but that's right. But if we said there were two possible reasons for this halacha, the second reason was a practical one, right? You've got to rebuild your new shul because you need somewhere to daven in. Fine. For that reason, it's not a problem. They've got the summer shul to daven in during the summer, right? So they can rebuild the winter one. But if you say the concern is that any time you knock down a shul, there's a concern something might go wrong. So never knock it down until you've built the new one. So that's still a problem, even if you've got a winter or summer shul, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yep.
That's the problem. So the Tosfos deals with this. The third Tosfos, where it says Hagar, he gives a few different tirutzim. One of them is relevant. One of them is relevant to the Gemara later on, so we'll get to that a bit later about whether you see there are problems, there are structural problems in the building, and but another reason he gives is. He says about if you just go halfway through the Tosfos, can you see that where it says Hagar? It's halfway through that Tosfos. It's V'oid nira, right? I'm leaving out the first bit because it's relevant to more later. V'oid nira, it says Kivan Yesham Beis HaKnesses Acher. Since there's another shul, Ein Lochoshim LeYivnu Zos. There's no concern if they don't rebuild this one, like you said, Jeremy, because there's another shul. And that which it says where there's another place to daven in Ein Beis HaKnesses. That's where there's no shul. Here, where there's actually a physical shul, it's not a problem, right? Because there's another proper shul, it's no problem. And that bit of Tosfos is why the Marsha changed the text of the Gemara. You with me? Because if you have the text of the Gemara, that the difference between them is there is another shul, right? Then you've got a problem with this piece of Gemara with Merim Mazutra, right? It doesn't fit together. You understand? Because if you said the whole difference between them is if there's another shul, then you're really, it's like checkmate. You've got no movement now. You've got no room for maneuvering at all in terms of the summer and winter shuls, because you can never rebuild unless you've got your shuls. You've got your new shul. But if you say that the right text of the Gemara is a place to daven in, then you can say, right, a place to daven in is not good enough, and you're worried about Pashiyus, so they might end up not building it, so they might go wrong. But if you've got another fully fledged shul, you're okay. Yeah. Or he says, Tosfos says also, it could be that Machmas Kar Chaim, because of the heat and the cold, there's no concern they might end up not building it because they're going to need it, right? They're not going to go into the winter without a winter shul. So it's like a practical reason. There's no concern. Or because there's such a large length of time, you've got 6 months, which in those days would be a very nice period of time to build a shul, there isn't this concern. Anyway, there you go. Okay, right. So the Gemara carries on. Yeah, everyone okay with that? Ready to go? Yeah, we're okay to go on. Omelei Ravina le Ravashi. So Ravina said to Ravashi, Govu zuzi machtimai. What happens if they gathered money, okay, they collected money for the shul, and they placed it all down, they got all the money ready for the new shul. So what's the halacha now? Are we still concerned about Pshia? Are we concerned about them neglecting to rebuild? So here you see, again, just to understand the flow and the structure of the Gemara here. Here you can see that the Gemara is going with the reason of Pshia. That's how you can infer from the Gemara and how the Rishonim, how the poskim will work out the halacha is the concern of Pshia. You might not building it, which has halachic ramifications, right? It's much more serious. As we said, it's not just about, you got another place to daven in. No, there's a concern you might neglect to do it. You see that from the fact that the Gemara now develops, the next piece of Gemara works with that understanding. And the Gemara has a fundamental problem, which is the Gemara is trying to tease out now what are the circumstances where this is not an issue. Because as you've all realized, right, it's a major problem. It's a massive logistical challenge, as Eli asked before, right? To have to require everyone to build their new shul before they knock down the old one is a huge, right? It's huge, right? It's going to impose on you massively. So the question is, what are the circumstances where we can say to this community, it's okay, we're not worried, you're not going to do it. So the Gemara says, what happens if they raise the money, and the money's already, what's the halacha? In that circumstance, can we say, they're definitely going to do it. They've got the money. Their money's in the bank. Omalei, so Rav Ashi said back to Ravina, no, that's not good enough. Maybe they're going to have to redeem captives. In other words, another mitzvah is going to come along, another mitzvah which trumps the building of a shul, and they're going to have to use it for that. And they'll give the money to redeem the captives. So in that situation, because that could happen, you have a you're going to have to you're going to have to it's interesting because here we've got the text pigeon shur redeem captive. There's again another girsa which has no the mitzvah, just as another mitzvah. Some of the mitzvah which comes first they're going to have to use the money for those purposes, and therefore they might do that, and they might neglect building it. So you can't do it unless you built the new shul. This raises, of course, the whole fascinating question about when you've raised money for a particular fund. Yeah, you've launched a charity campaign for some particular purpose, and let's say, I don't know, there's some massive crisis, and you've got the money in the bank. Can you then take the money and use it for something else? That's a really, really complicated area of halach. People have given it for a particular reason, right? Later on in the perek, I think the Gemara will talk about the responsibilities. One of the main sugyas of tzedakah are in the first perek of Basra, right? It's the main halachas of tzedakah in this perek as well. I'd say one of the reasons I wanted to learn this, I thought this would be a lovely masechta to learn, is because we're going to cover, even though it doesn't look like it, because Bava Basra you're going to see that we're going to cover some massively important topics in areas in halacha. How much practical halacha we can do is a different, we'll see, but either way we can see the sugyas behind it. So that's a question maybe that will be dealt with later in some way.
Well, I have to say, I'm not persuaded by the argument. Well, we've got the money. You don't have to worry about Shia. Shia is not just about. If it was just about money, they would have said this is about money. But Shia is about a whole lot of other things. It's about collecting money. It's about getting planning. It's about hiring the right contractors. Right, about the contractors staying on board through the building project. It's about the building committee not falling apart. And I can tell you, I can speak from personal experience. So Shia is a much wider term than just money. So why would that's a very important point, and I take that point completely. Why would the Gemara think that would be enough? It could be, Jeremy, that you're right in the sense that the Gemara could have gone down that pathway as well. But the Gemara has dealt with this in the simplest way and said, well, something might happen and they won't be able to use the money. Right? Meaning, it's true. There could be multiple other reasons why it's not good enough just to collect the money, right? There could be many other reasons, right? But the Gemara gives a simple reason why just collecting the money is not good enough, because just having the money in the bank is not enough, right? You could have given the reasons you're giving as well. But the Gemara now builds it up and says, Shrigi, Livni, Vahadri, Hudri, Amachti, Kashurimai. What happens if you go much further than collecting the money, right? You've actually got the bricks piled up, you're ready to put them in the building, and you've actually sort of planed you've prepared the beams of wood for the roof. You've sanded them down, right? You've done all these things. That's, I think, hodri, or whatever it is, whether it's wood for the roof or some other type of material. The roof material is ready. The machdik shuri and the beams are placed. Everything is there. Everything's there, right? So
Yeah, I think the hudri is probably not wood, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's some type of material that they use for the roof material. The Gemara says, "My what's the halacha? If you've got everything ready, got all the construction materials in place, my what's the halacha? Maybe that's enough. You're not going to not do it now." Amalei said to him, "No, zimnin mistramilu pigeon shvuyim. Maybe pigeon shvuyim again. You'll have the mitzvah of pigeon shvuyim to redeem captives that will come along and mazavni v'yavi lahu, and you'll sell the building materials, and you'll use them to redeem the captives. You might end up doing that. So the Gemara says, if so, afilu banu nami. Oh, by the way, so that's also probably why there was a change in the text, yeah? Meaning the Gemara didn't have to come onto maybe pigeon shvuyim before. It could be there's another mitzvah you might be able to use the money for. But once once you've got the bricks, the only mitzvah the Gemara can think of which might enable you to sell it is the redeeming captives, perhaps. Even if you built the shul, you built a completely new shul, you should never knock it down. Never knock the old one down ever, even when you've got your new shul. Why? Pigeon shvuyim might come along. Yeah, you might come a case of pigeon shvuyim. You're going to have to sell your new shul, your brand new shul already built to redeem captives. Amalei said to him, "No, no one sells their own dwelling places. People don't sell their where they live. People don't sell places that they live." That's a very, very interesting phrase. That, the Gemara doesn't say, "No, you can't sell a shul for pigeon shvuyim." The Gemara says, people don't sell their own homes. People don't do that. You don't sell your own home. No one's going to sell a ready-built shul for any reason, even if you're going to redeem captives. So I want to check the Rambam on this in a second, but let's just see Rashi. Zuzi, for the new shul, and then the hand of the Gabbai, is there any concern they might be negligent or not? That was the shaila. Shrigi livnim sudarim alavenim zal gavzeh. The bricks are piled on top of each other. Zumonim assistant b'vinyan, and they're ready to put them in the building. Hadri hodri meshupin musukonin ruhite agag kibruns. So they, whatever that is, they are these planes of the roof are all ready. Have any of you got a nice translation of Hadri hodri? Has anyone got an art scroll there? I don't know whether you've probably got a nice translation.
It just says the rafters are planed.
Okay, the rafters are planed. All right, that will do.
The beams are deposited.
Okay. Kibonu nami. So if so, kibonu nami, when they built the big kanishta chaduta, a new shul, lo nisturu ala atika. You shouldn't knock down the old one. Why? The deal with Mitzrayim pigeon shrimps zamnile. Maybe you have a regime captives and you'll have to sell your new shul. Okay. Now, before the Gemara is going to go on to give another qualifications, I just want to say this issue of when you could sell a shul. There is the Rambam in Chosmat Nesaniyim. Find this. Yeah. So he goes through the Rambam here in Hilchos Manasani and Perek Ches. He goes through in Halacha Yud. He talks about the incredible mitzvah of pigeon shvuyim. He says to redeem captives, kodim leparnosas aniyim. It comes before sustaining the poor, or lechsosan to cover them, to dress them. Ve'einacha mitzvah rabok with pigeon shvuyim. There's no mitzvah greater than redeeming captives. The captive is included in those who are starved and famished. They have no clothes. He's sakonos nefashos. And he says, someone who doesn't hide his eye from participating in redeeming a captive. It brings many loisas, says, that a person's involved in if they have the ability to help rescue captives and don't take part in it. You have to open your hand. He says, there is no mitzvah greater. There is no mitzvah greater than as pigeon shvuyim. There's no greater mitzvah than pigeon shvuyim redeeming captives. I remember when they exchanged all those prisoners. You remember for Gilad Shalit? I don't know how many it was. It was something like
1,000, it was well over 1,000 prisoners. I remember thinking at the time, I think I spoke about this, I think in shul, that you can't understand, if you haven't got it's ingrained within us as a people, right? That there is no mitzvah greater than Pidyon Shvuyim. It's beyond all logic, A Jew is held captive, we can't rest, right? We can't rest as a people. It's something which is incomprehensible unless it's part of our DNA. That's what the Rambam is expressing here. Now, halacha yudalef, this is relevant to our Gemara. Says people in the city who gathered money to build a shul, mitzvah, and mitzvah came up. Boy es hamois, right? They can use the money for the mitzvah, even though they gathered the mitzvah for a shul. Okay, if another mitzvah comes along, they're allowed to spend the money on that. Interesting. If they bought like stones and beams and everything else, the only mitzvah you're allowed to sell ready-made beams and already, you've bought the materials. The only case you can sell it for is Pidyon Shvuyim. Right? Even if they brought the bricks, they've actually prepared the stones, they've shaped the beams, everything's ready. They can sell everything but Pidyon Shvuyim alone. It's the only mitzvah you can do it for. So now you can understand the Girsa and the Gemara, right? Why the first bit of the Gemara, this follows the Rambam, yeah? This is right? That obviously the Girsa is that the first stage of the Gemara doesn't talk about Pidyon Shvuyim, just talks about mitzvah, because if you just got the money, you can use it. If there are other mitzvahs you can decide to divert the money towards, right? But when it comes to, not you, but obviously the tzibur, the kehillah, whatever it is, the represented, but when it comes to Pidyon, when they've already got all the materials prepared, only Pidyon Shvuyim. Avol, says the Rambam, in Bonu, Gomru, if they built and finished the shul, lo yimkeres beis hakneses, they cannot sell the shul. Elo yigvu lepidyonon min hatzibur. They have to gather the money to redeem the captives from the tzibur. You can no longer, you don't knock down a shul for that reason. Yeah. So. If they've already built the shul, yeah. So that's right. So the Hagos Hagra says on that Rambam, and I had this in the side of my Gemara. The Hagos Hagra says like this. He says, "Keinu girsoso sham." This is the Rambam's girsa. The Rambam's girsa in our sugya was, if you've built it, that's it. Aval bonu loy. That was his girsa in our Gemara. If you built it, you cannot sell the shul. Aval says the Gon lefi girso same girsa shalonu. According to our girsa, in our Gemara, in the way we have the girsa, mashma to mutza af b'chai gavna. It implies that it's allowed, right, even in such a situation. It's even allowed in such a situation. How does the Vilna Gaon infer that? Because what does the Gemara say? Can you see what we've got? Afilu bonu nami omale. So he says, dirsa de inshi. Right? What does it say? Dirsa de inshi lo mizavni. People don't sell their own homes. Are you with me? People don't sell their own homes. Right? It's not saying you can't. It's not saying you can't. You can, but people don't do it. People don't do it, and that is why you don't. That is why you don't sell the. That is why you wouldn't sell it. It's just the same as you. It's just people wouldn't agree to do it. But technically, you can. You could even sell a shul in order to raise on a Pidyon Shvuyim. I just want to take a quick look in the Shulchan Aruch. See what he says here. I'm just looking this up. Sorry, on Bar Ilan because it's quicker than getting a sefer now. Ration and base of cotton base to Gimel. Ration and base. Here it is. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. Ration base of cotton base to Gimel. Yeah. So the Shulchan Aruch says, sorry, it says pigeon shvuyim kodem parasol nechsusim. They mitzvah. There's no greater mitzvah pigeon shvuyim. B'chol v'shegol mos b'shviloi. For any mitzvah you collected money, you're chayim l'shnes on the pigeon shvuyim. You're allowed to change the pigeon shvuyim. V'afilim govu l'tzorach binyan beis hakneses. Even if they collected money to build a shul, v'afilim kono eitzim avonim hakotzim l'tzorach habinyan. They bought the materials. She'osu l'mach b'shul mitzvah acheres. You can't sell them another mitzvah. Mutzah l'mach mitzvah pigeon shvuyim. You're allowed to sell them for pigeon shvuyim. Avolim bonuhu kvar. But if they've already built it, lo yumochro so. Lo yumochro so. They can't sell it. They can't sell it. So he says the same thing. He says the same thing as the Rambam. He says the same thing as the Rambam. Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
Not to be too technical, but what if it was half built?
What was that? Half built.
Yeah. Can you finish building the shul, or do you have to sell the remaining materials that you have for pigeon shvuyim?
That's interesting. Is it a din in the shul being usable or ready to build? Ready usable. Or is it the fact that I don't know. Is it the fact that it's once it's actually in the build, it's actually being built? Yeah. It's okay. Yeah, but it's interesting because it will depend on this. It does seem that it will depend on this particular the way you have the way the girsa is in the Gemara. Whether we say that a person wouldn't sell their own home, it doesn't mean you can't if you want to. It's just the people generally wouldn't agree to do it. Anyway, there you go. There's just a little bit on that. But it's a very, very interesting sugya as to how far the mitzvah of pigeon shvuyim goes. Could you even sell a full shul in order to do so? As you say, I haven't seen on the Nosei Kalim on the Shulchan Aruch, but the Shulchan Aruch seems to say that you would not actually knock down a shul in order to redeem captives. Okay. Then the last bit of the Gemara says, right? We only say this. What does it mean we only say this? We only say, this is a very important exception to the rule of not knocking it down. You only say that you can't knock down the old wall, right? Only where they haven't seen any crack appear in it, that it's ready to fall down. If they see a crack in the building, so there's something wrong with it, right? There's a split in the building or whatever, and it's going to fall, it's going to collapse. Then Sosri Aboni, then you knock it down and you rebuild it. As Rav Ashi, we see he saw a crack in the building, in the shul, in the shul in Masa Mechasya, which is the place where he lived, the place of Mechasya. And what did he do? Sosre, he knocked it down, but he put his bed inside the shul. He didn't take it out. He didn't take it out until they had fixed the pipes. They'd fixed the water that was leaking. That's what it seems to. It could be that means that he left it in right till they'd finished. They finished all the building work. That might be what he means. He left it in there until they'd even finished all the pipe work. Perhaps that's what it means. But either way, that's what he did. Or maybe it was just that there was only a small problem with the shul. Didn't need to knock the whole thing down. But he made sure that by sleeping in there, he made sure that they wouldn't be negligent and leave it to go to ruin. So Rashi says, they didn't say that you don't knock down the old one, only if they didn't see a problem with it. Some crack in it that's ready to fall down. But if you see there's a problem with it, the physical construction isn't sound, that's a different story. If the physical construction isn't sound, so then you can knock it down straight away to rebuild it. They shouldn't be negligent with the building. So they're going to see the rain and the sun are bothering him, so they're going to make sure they get on with it. And shivchi means marzavin, the channels of water. The channels of water. So obviously this is very important for Eli, for your question, right? So you said before, what is the solution, right? So the obvious solution is a situation where the building has serious structural problems. That's an obvious case, right? Where you would be able to knock down a building even before you build the new one, right? It's chozi bot tiyua. So the question is, this exemption of chozi bot tiyua, where you, this exemption of chozi bot tiyua
is where they see a crack in it. How far does that go? That's really the question. So that Tosfos that we did half of before. So his first answer really was that he says that if there are two shuls, these two he says if the two shuls, he says that the summer and the winter shuls, he says that's like ikotiyur. That's like a crack. Why? There's nothing wrong with it structurally, because you've got to think bigger. What does it want to mean as a structural problem? Anyone? What do you think? What does it mean? Let's take it beyond just the structural problem. What does it mean? It means it's not functioning, right? It's not usable. You know, when do people now? Dangerous. But let me ask you a very, very simple question. The majority of cases people need to build shuls nowadays, is a lack of space, right? We should know in Toras Chaim, please God, once everyone comes back. It's like, it's a space issue, right? So the question is, what Tosfos seems to say is, right, that where there's a tiur, there's a crack in the shul, the Gemara says, there's something structurally unsafe, then you're allowed to rebuild, even if you're allowed to knock it down even before you rebuild a new one. But Tosfos says that the Beikaita and the Beisisfa, when they used to rebuild, knock down, even before they'd rebuilt it, they would knock down the summer shul. He says, Hovi kumai ikotiyur, v'shori, that's like there being a crack and it's mutter. I think he means because if it's not fit for purpose, if you have only a winter shul, that is not used, you cannot use it in the summer. You're not going to be able to use your summer shul when you get there. Then that's a case, I think he's saying, where there's a structural problem. It's the same as if there was a structural problem. He says if they were in two different. What was that?
Isn't that a bit of a stretch? I don't really see how you can stretch it to that degree.
Let's have a look here. 1 second. Let's see what it says in the halacha. So it says, so the Shulchan Aruch says in Kufnan Beis, you can't knock down a shul to build another shul. In case something goes wrong and they don't build the second one. So that's the same, that's what we said, right? That's the second. The reason is you might end up not rebuilding it. That's the problem. You build the other one first, right? And then you knock down the old one. That's what you got to do. You just want to knock down one wall to make it bigger. It's the same thing. This is only when the first one was strong. If the foundations have been destroyed, or the walls have begun to cave in, there's something structurally wrong with it. You can knock down straight away. And you start building quickly day and night. Unless something goes wrong and it's left desolate. Right? And on that, the Mishnah Berurah says, similarly, if there was a decree from the local rulers not to daven anymore in that shul, that will be the same thing. There's some problem, you can't do anything about that. Okay. Let's see. So then he brings a story. He says the Taz brings the following case. He says there was a story in a certain city where the Jews were living outside the walls and they came to settle inside the walls, and the shul was left alone outside the walls. And he says, the Taz says, I said, there's no there is no crack in the walls greater than this. And I let them knock it down so that they could rebuild inside the wall. And they should start building the new one. And then they should take the old one, he says, from the stones from the old one, and they should build it inside the walls. So again, I'm just thinking aloud there. I'm not saying, with sort of for definite, but I think that this question of how far you can stretch the notion of ikotiyur, right, where there's a structural problem, where you've got a serious issue with nothing to do, then maybe that will give you the permission to do it as well. Why do you say it's a stretch, Eddie?
It just seemed logically to be a bit of a stretch, that was all, from where the Gemara is at.
Yeah.
But does this mean, it's slightly off the point, but if someone has decides to have a minyan in their house, and it also applies to our shul, because I remember when we set up the shul, it wasn't called a Beis Knesset, it's called a Beis HaMedrash, and that had different halachic ramifications. But does that mean someone couldn't knock their house down, or if they started using their house as a shtibel or something? I mean, where do you sort of draw the line on these things?
I think this applies to a Beis Medrash as well. I think. I don't think these halachas are different, but I don't think it would be the same if it's just a private and maybe using a private house temporarily. I don't think so. I mean, he talks here also about the Ramah talks about he says also that you can't take stones from the shul, the old shul, to use them for the new one. And he says you can't knock. That was something you also mentioned earlier. He also says you also can't knock down anything from the shul unless you're doing it in order to rebuild. You're doing it to rebuild a new one. You take certain things down. I mean, to say, not talking about, I think, knocking down the whole shul, but just a little part of the shul. You want to rebuild something inside the shul. You have to take it down in order to rebuild. So I don't know how far this goes. I think it does apply, though, presumably to things we call a Beis Medrash as well. But there is, I'm seeing here in the Bir Halacha, he suggests this idea that where he says, where it's too small to contain everyone davening, right? And you can't fix it unless you knock down the original building, it's mutar. Because he says that is the same right? That's like the crack in the walls that the Rabbanon permitted. So this crack in the walls, right, is a crack to permission. That's what I'm saying, right? This is the direction of travel. We're in a situation where you have no other solution. For example, I think the classic case is that you're trying to rebuild it in the same place, yeah. That you can't rebuild unless you stop the first one, right? How can you, right? And say, so that might be it could be that you can extend it as to that level, even when there's not enough space and the old one is too small. So there's a lot more here. It's a much bigger study. We don't have time to see anything else. The final point I'll just mention is that this Tosfos, which we won't have time to go through, where he talks about bringing his bed inside the shul, he asks the question and he says, you're not allowed to sleep in a shul. Yeah. So how could he go inside this? How could he have slept inside the shul? And he basically said, what?
But it wasn't a shul yet. It was still being built.
Well, it was, but no. But this was Chosi Botziua. I don't think he was saying they were knocking down the whole shul. There was a crack. It was leaking. There was water coming in, and they needed to fix that leak. Right? And he brought his bed in the shul to make sure they get on with it. That's what it means, the masakin shvichi. I don't think he was knocking down the whole shul until they fixed the leak. Right? And Tosfos' question is, how could he sleep inside the shul? And he basically says, he talks about he talks about whether or not you can say, he says, he didn't really put his bed inside the actual shul. It was next to the shul, the place where they used to have guests. People who were wayfarers used to sleep inside the shul in like a side room. We know that from those who make kiddush in shul on Friday night. That was the origin of that minhag. And that's how it is. And Tosfos had tried to solve the problem with saying the Botei Knesios in Bovel were made on condition, al Tanai. They made on condition. They made these conditions, and then he tried to solve that and say that was a solution, but he says that's not a solution. That's not a solution to say that they were made on condition to allow these. That wouldn't allow the sleeping in it for that reason. And he says. So the Gemara, his final point is, so what does it mean that the Botei Knesios in Bovel are made on condition? The Farish read that if they are destroyed, you can do in them what you will, except for lightheadedness. That's what it means that in Bovel, they built them with these conditions built into them. Okay, that's how it is. But either way, that's how he brought his. He was allowed to. He wasn't actually in the actual shul. Obviously, there's a lot more to this. A lot more to this sugya, but at least it's been a bit of a taster into it and how you get there from the Gemara. So next time, Mitzvah Hashem, we will press on with the story of Bava ben Buta and the Amalchi Chashmonaim. And have a very good evening and a good Chodesh. Thank you for joining.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure.